Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In going through my social media recently, I was looking at a short that I made of a card with this pumpkin duo set, and I looked at the shape of this tall, skinny pumpkin, and I kind of thought it looked a little bit like a ghost. So I'm going to take this die set and use some vellum as well as some permanent adhesive sheets from Sizzix, and I'm going to try make some ghosts out of them. I always love when you can figure out or see shapes in something and use it for something it isn't necessarily intended for. So the first step is to take these Sizzix adhesive sheets, and I'm using my Misti to make sure that I can line it up well with this piece of vellum. So I put that sheet adhesive side up in my Misti and then put the vellum over top of it. By putting the vellum over top of it or over top of the adhesive sheet, once it's all die cut, I can just peel the backing off that adhesive and I can glue my layers together. Vellum doesn't like liquid glue, and tape runner typically shows through. So this is the perfect solution to be able to glue the layers together without using a liquid glue or without using a tape runner or something that you might see through it. A Citron machine or something that lays adhesive over the entire surface would work as well. There are vellum adhesives that aren't supposed to show through vellum, but I always find that I can see them and they're not completely clear. So this is the perfect solution because you don't see the adhesive at all. So I'm going to do 3 ghosts here. I'm going to see how many I can get out of this 6x6 piece of vellum. And I do get most of it out of there, and I end up using a scrap of vellum plus a scrap of the adhesive sheet that I have to get the third one. I'm putting 4 of the pieces down from this pumpkin. There's actually a couple more. There's one lower layer from this pumpkin that has a stem on it. Didn't need to use that because the base layer that I'm using for this is solid anyways. And then there's also a layer with just the stem for the pumpkin. And obviously we don't need that piece either. So there's 4 different dies that we're using here. Now, because the vellum is super thin and this adhesive is very thin, it is challenging at some point to get the adhesive backing off of the vellum. It's easy enough with nails. If you didn't have nails, you could use a die pick, or you could use like a craft knife to get in between there. But it's a lot easier to get the backing of this adhesive sheet off of cardstock than it is of vellum, because the cardstock's a little bit thicker. It's easier to just grab that backing. So all I'm doing is taking my layers, taking the backing off and laying them on top. And these dies, they put a little bit of a score line where the next layer goes. So it's really easy to tell exactly where each layer is meant to lay. Once I have all 3 of my ghosts together, I'm going to put an acrylic block and just let the adhesive sit and lay nice and flat with this. I find these adhesive sheets are, you can pick them off when you first make them, or when you first layer things together, but after they've sat for a while, they become a little bit more permanent, or at least that's my experience. I took a garden greens die and cut a couple pieces out of it that I thought would be okay for the eyes and the mouth. Now, I like how this card turned out in the end, but there's a couple different things that I would change, and one of them are the eyes and the mouth. I don't necessarily mind the shapes, but this is done out of cardstock on top of vellum, and I think if I were to do with this again, I would take my vellum, put some black or dark gray alcohol ink on it, so I have something that's a bit transparent and dark as well, and then die cut those pieces. This idea, and I'm doing this like 1 week before Halloween, so there's kind of a timeline crunch to get this video done, up and uploaded. So I didn't want to redo the video, but once I'm done and looking at it, something a little bit more transparent I think would be a little bit nicer, and it wouldn't be quite as stark as the black cardstock against the vellum. Not saying that this is wrong in any way, but there's a few things that I would change about this card in the end, and this is just one of them. So I'm taking my adhesive and putting it on the back of the cardstock here. I am using liquid glue here, but because they're such small areas and I'm only using a tiny little bit, it really doesn't affect the vellum that much. You could still use those adhesive sheets and glue them on that way. And if I were to do this card again and use those, use the vellum with the black alcohol ink or something like that, I would put adhesive sheets on it and just glue it down that way so that I didn't have to use the liquid glue. But for something so tiny, you don't really notice it. It doesn't warp the vellum for this. Once that is done, I'm once again putting that aside, putting that acrylic block over that to hold those pieces down while they dry. And now I'm going to start working on the background. So I have a piece of watercolor cardstock here. I'm working on the flat side. This watercolor cardstock has a flat and a textured side. I'm going to take some Masking Magic. I've already cut a circle out of it with a die, and then I took a cardstock scrap and also cut the same circle out of that, and you'll see why I use that in a minute. I've got 3 different distress inks here. I have Twisted Citron, Shaded Lilac, and Villainous Potion. And I'm just going to very lightly put the Twisted Citron and the Shaded Lilac around where the moon is going to go. And then I'll be a little bit heavier with the Villainous Potion. I'll do that all the way around the edge of the cardstock. You can see with the blending brush, I'm kind of working in a circular motion. I don't want to get marks of this ink while I'm blending with it. So I'm just doing this for the lightest layer. And then, especially when it comes to the Villainous Potion, once I have that light layer down, I can gently work on getting that darker. And I do that little bit by little bit. You don't want to take it and go heavy-handed right away because you can't take ink away. You could always add more, but you can't take it away. So best to be a light hand at first until you get a feel for how much ink is on your brush, as well as what pressure to use, and then slowly build your ink up. I'm just using the ink blending brush here. You could use whatever ink blending tools that you like, or you could even just ink blend into a solid area, but I wanted to have that moon there, and I'm going to use some grit paste glow so that it kind of glows when you turn the lights off. I thought that would be a fun effect, and because it's a new supply, I can't seem to get enough of it. So I'm trying to make sure that this Villainous Potion is darker around the edges and slowly fades to the light color and then the citron. So now that that background is done, I am taking the Masking Magic mask off, and then I'm putting that cardstock stencil that I made and putting that over top, and then putting a thin layer of the grit paste glow. I'm going to set that aside to dry, and then I'm taking a brush and I'm going to put a light area, a light coat around the edges. I don't want to use a lot. Again, this is something that's liquid. Vellum doesn't like liquid, but it can handle it if you put very minimal amounts. I just want to put this around the outside of it so that when that moon glows and I turn the lights off, I get kind of a little bit of a glow around the outside of these ghosts. And it did end up working perfectly, and it looks really, really cool. So I'm just using a small brush for this. I want to work a little bit at a time and just get just a touch around there. There's also something that is, or you can also get glow-in-the-dark embossing powder. That would be a cool way to use this as well. You could put some Versamark ink and then use that embossing powder. And you can do the same thing for the moon as well. I really like this grit paste glow though, because it has a really cool texture with it. When you look at the moon itself, it almost looks like it's like a velvet. It almost looks fuzzy. Just the combination of the color with the grit paste, I guess, it's really interesting looking. So once I have the edges of these ghosts done, I'm going to set them aside to dry. So 2 of the ghosts, I only did the top of the head because I have a plan to have them hiding behind trees, and 1 I did all the way around. Once that is all dry, I'm taking my background and I'm gluing it to my card base. I'm just making an A2 card here, so the full measurement of it is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I have some of these new forest shadow trees cut, and I have extras cut. I did another card. It's actually not posted yet, but these are some extras that I've used for this. And this is a second thing that I would change about this card. If I were to do it again, what I would do is either do a distressed background and then die cut them and then ink so there's some dark at the bottom going to light at the top. They're a little bit too solid for my liking, but that's okay. Again, I'm doing this a week before Halloween, so there's not a whole lot of time to sit and play. And it's one of those things that I didn't really notice until the card was completely done, but I think it would blend a little bit better with the ghosts in the background if either I did a distressed background and then inked, or just took my cardstock trees or die cut trees and then ink blended to kind of create a very similar look to the background, but with green inks. So I love these forest shadow dies because there are two different tree dies that are included. They work very, very well together. I chose the darker one for the background and I'm using the lighter one for the foreground. I've got two ghosts hiding behind those little bits of trees there. And then once that is completely dry, I will cut off all of those excess little bits with my scissors and then glue that third ghost down. So the other thing that you could do for these ghosts is they are all facing the same way. If you die cut one of your ghosts where the die was against the backing, you could have one facing the other way. But I don't think it really matters for this particular card, just an idea for the future. So there's my finished card there. It looks the coolest once you turn the light off and you see that moon glowing and then the little bit of glow around the ghost. I think it looks really, really cool. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think it's kind of a fun, different idea. And yet another way that you can use that pumpkin die duo die set for something that's a little bit non-traditional, something that's a little bit fun and seasonal. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed watching this process. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.